The automatic door shuddered as it opened, releasing a blast of cold air into the fluorescent-lit pharmacy. Rachel Bennett stepped through, clutching her son Noah against her chest as though he were the last fragile ember she had left in the world. The blanket around him was thin, frayed at the edges, barely doing its job against the cruel Brooklyn winter that clawed at their backs. His forehead pressed into her neck, burning with fever. He breathed in shallow, uneven spurts, each one making her heart jolt like a frightened bird. She moved quickly, though her legs felt like lead. Her waitress uniform and old, yellow shirt and a pair of faded black pants that bit into her waist was never meant for the biting winds or for sleepless nights spent pacing the floor with a sick child. Her shoes, cracked along the seams, squeaked against the polished linoleum as she made her way to the counter. Rachel was 29, but the years of hardship etched themselves into her skin, making her look older. Dark circles pulled under her hollow eyes. Her lips were dry, trembling not from the cold, but from fear. Behind the counter sat a young clerk in a pristine white lab coat, his name badge red mark, the neat print almost mocking in its order and calm. He was typing into the computer with mechanical detachment, the rhythmic tapping of the keys so far removed from the chaos spinning inside Rachel's mind. She reached the counter and steadied herself with a hand, taking a shaky breath. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking before she could steal it. "My baby, he's burning up. 104. I need amoxicillin." The children's suspension, her words tumbled out in fragments, heavy with panic. "I'll pay by Thursday. I swear it. Just give it to me now, please." Mark looked up, startled. His gaze flickered over her crumpled shirt, the baby's flushed, sweaty face. The desperation etched in every line of her posture. For a fleeting second, pity touched his eyes, but it vanished beneath the weight of protocol. He shifted uneasily in his chair, glancing at the camera in the corner. His jaw tightened. "Ma'am," he began, his voice slow, rehearsed, and detached. "Without a prescription and without payment, there's nothing I can do." The words sliced through her like glass. Rachel blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly, as if by sheer will she could bend reality. "I'm not asking for charity," she pleaded, clutching Noah tighter, as if the very strength of her arms could shield him from illness. "I'll leave my ID. You can keep it. He's getting worse, you can see that. Please." Mark's face flushed with discomfort, but his tone hardened, as though hiding behind the rules would make her disappear. "It's a controlled medication. If I gave it without authorization, I could lose my job." Rachel's chest tightened. The room seemed to shrink, the glaring lights pressing down on her. Around her, voices hushed. The two women in the vitamin aisle stared. An older man by the syrup shifted uncomfortably, his hand hovering near his cart. But he said nothing. A young mother near the register glanced at Noah as though he were contagious. Shame crept hot and prickly up Rachel's neck. Her voice cracked, rising in a fragile storm. "The hospital said the pediatrician won't be in until next week." "Next week? He's had this fever since yesterday. He's slipping away. Can't you see?" She stopped herself, realizing she was shouting. Every pair of eyes in the pharmacy pinned on her like judgment. Noah whimpered weakly against her shoulder, too exhausted to cry. Rachel's strength faltered. She staggered back, her knees nearly giving out. "Okay," she murmured, her words trembling, her pride collapsing into dust. "I'm sorry. It's my fault." Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall here. Under the cold fluorescent light and the silent scrutiny of strangers, the world blurred around her, her heart sinking into a hollow cavern of hopelessness. She turned slightly, ready to retreat into the freezing streets with nothing but despair in her arms. And then just as her vision began to dim with defeat, she felt it. A presence, solid, commanding, quietly watching. A figure standing a few feet away, unseen until now, but impossibly steady amidst the whispers and fluorescent glare. His eyes were fixed on her, sharp with recognition, as if he understood not just her desperation, but the story behind it. Rachel froze, Noah's hot breath dampening her collar. For the first time that morning, she wasn't entirely alone. Asterisk under the artificial glow of the pharmacy lights, silence thickened like fog. Rachel could hear the faint hum of the overhead fixtures, the shuffling of feet from strangers who did nothing but watch, and the shallow, uneven breaths of Noah pressed against her chest. She was ready to leave, ready to surrender, to let shame consume her and drag her out into the biting cold. When a deep voice cut through the stagnant air, "That won't be necessary." Rachel stopped in her tracks. The voice carried authority, the kind that silences a room without effort. She turned her head slowly, afraid to hope, afraid to draw more attention. At the end of the aisle stood a man, tall and sharply dressed, his coat tailored to perfection, the dark wool catching the light with quiet elegance. His presence seemed out of place here, among the discount vitamins and harsh fluorescent lighting. Like a polished diamond dropped into a pile of gravel, the man stepped forward, the click of his shoes deliberate and sure. His dark hair was swept neatly back, a touch of silver at the temples that only made him look more distinguished. His eyes piercing, calculating, yet softened by something unspoken locked on Rachel. For a moment, she felt stripped bare, as though he could see past her worn clothes and trembling hands, straight into the cavern of her exhaustion and fear. "Give her the medication," the man said firmly, his gaze shifting to Mark behind the counter. His tone left no room for debate. Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He glanced nervously at the security camera, then back at the man, his voice unsteady. "Sir, I can't." "Not without. You can," the man interrupted, his voice sharp as glass. "And you will. Put it on my account." Murmurs rippled through the pharmacy. The older man by the syrups leaned forward, curious. The young woman at the register whispered to the cashier. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea who this stranger was, why he was intervening, or what it would cost her later. All she knew was that for the first time that morning, someone was standing between her and despair. Mark swallowed hard, clearly aware he was dealing with someone important. "Yes, Mr. Hayes," he stammered, disappearing into the shelves behind him. Rachel blinked. "Mr. Hayes." The name struck a faint chord in her mind, though she couldn't place it. The man this Hayes turned back to her, his gaze softening, though his jaw remained tense. "You should sit," he said quietly, his voice gentler now. "You're shaking." Rachel's instinct bristled. Pride surged to the surface, colliding with gratitude. "I didn't ask for your help," she muttered, clutching Noah tighter. She couldn't afford to feel indebted to anyone, especially a stranger who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a corner pharmacy in Brooklyn. He studied her for a long moment. "I know," he said simply, "but you needed it." Something in his tone unsettled her. It wasn't pity, it was conviction, as if he knew exactly what it meant to stand where she stood now. Rachel lowered her gaze, too exhausted to argue, too consumed by the heat radiating from Noah's tiny body. Mark returned moments later with a small white bag, his hands trembling as he placed it on the counter. "Children's amoxicillin suspension," he said quietly. Hayes reached into his wallet and handed over a sleek black card without a second glance. Rachel's throat tightened. Relief flooded her, warm and dangerous, threatening to buckle her knees. She reached out for the bag, but Hayes was faster. He picked it up, holding it out to her himself. Their fingers brushed as she took it, as she felt the strange weight of his gaze again, an intensity that made her chest ache. "Make sure he takes it with food," Hayes said softly, his eyes flicking to Noah, "and keep him warm tonight. The fever will break." Rachel nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She wanted to thank him, to rail at him, to ask why, but the words tangled in her throat. She turned slightly, prepared to escape before her composure shattered completely. "Wait." Asterisk, the word froze her in place. She turned back slowly, bracing herself. Hayes's expression had shifted. There was a flicker of something raw in his eyes, something that didn't belong to a man of wealth and power. "Tell me your name," he said. Her lips parted, startled. "Rachel," she whispered. He nodded once, as though committing it to memory, before stepping back. "Rachel, you won't have to do this alone. Not anymore." The promise in his voice sent a chill down her spine, equal parts terrifying and strangely comforting. She didn't know who he was or why he cared, but as she walked out into the cold with Noah pressed against her chest, and the medicine clutched tightly in her hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just shifted subtly, dangerously into something entirely new. And behind the glass doors, Daniel Hayes watched her go, his jaw tight, his thoughts a storm. He had seen this before too many years ago, in another pharmacy, with another desperate mother. Only this time, he wouldn't stand by and do nothing. Asterisk. The storm had passed for the night, but Rachel felt the cold creep into her bones as she shuffled up the cracked steps of her apartment building. The hallway smelled faintly of damp carpet and old paint, the kind of place that never truly warmed, no matter how high the radiator hissed. She held Noah tighter, the paper bag rustling softly in her other hand. Relief hummed faintly in her chest. Medicine, real medicine, but it was laced with unease. That man, Hayes, his eyes had lingered on her too long. His words had carried too much weight. She didn't know whether to fear him, thank him, or both die inside. Her apartment was a single-room space, walls lined with peeling wallpaper, the window edges sealed with duct tape against drafts. She laid Noah gently on their small couch, tucking him into the thinnest of blankets. His skin was still hot, but not as blazing as before. She measured out the pink suspension with trembling hands, whispering soft encouragement as she coaxed him to drink. Noah swallowed weakly, his lashes fluttering against flushed cheeks. She brushed his damp hair back, her throat tight with love and exhaustion. For a while, she sat there in the dim light, just listening to the tick of the radiator and her son's uneven breathing. She told herself she'd forget the man in the pharmacy. She couldn't afford to think about strangers who swooped in with kindness. Not when survival demanded she keep her walls high. People always left. Promises always broke. She would not let hope undo her. But the next morning, when Rachel left for her double shift at the diner, he was waiting. Daniel Hayes stood across the street, his black car gleaming under the pale winter sun. He wasn't dressed for attention, no polished suit, no watch that screamed wealth. Instead, a simple coat, dark scarf, and gloves. But he couldn't hide who he was. The posture of command, the sharpness in his eyes, the air of someone who belonged to a different world. Rachel froze halfway down the stoop, her breath catching. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the street despite the morning bustle. He didn't flinch. "To make sure your son's fever broke." Her jaw clenched. "You don't even know us." His gaze didn't waver. "You're right. But I know what it's like to be him." He tilted his head toward the building, toward Noah. "And I know what it's like to be you." Rachel's chest tightened. A part of her wanted to scream at him to leave, to stop looking at her like he could see through every layer of armor she'd built. Another part wanted to collapse into his words. Let them hold her up for once instead of fighting alone. She pushed both impulses down and marched past him, chin high, but Hayes didn't leave. Over the next days, he appeared in ways that unnerved her. A doctor showed up at her apartment one evening, claiming he'd been sent by a friend to check Noah's recovery. At the diner, when Rachel dropped a tray of dishes in her exhaustion, she looked up to see Hayes seated in a booth, his eyes fixed on her not with judgment, but with something far more dangerous, recognition. At once, as she walked home late at night, too tired to notice the men loitering at the corner until it was almost too late, it was Hayes who stepped from the shadows, his presence scattering them. Without a word, each encounter left Rachel torn between gratitude and anger, suspicion, and something she didn't dare name. She couldn't understand why a millionaire would care about her or her son. What did he gain from this? What was he hiding behind those unreadable eyes? Noah, however, responded differently. When Hayes visited, the boy's fevered cries eased, his tiny fingers reaching curiously for the man's wristwatch, his head lolling peacefully against his chest when Hayes held him for a moment, to give Rachel's arms a rest. It unsettled her, seeing her son so comfortable with him, as though children could sense what adults denied. One night, Rachel confronted him. They stood in the narrow hallway outside her apartment, the radiator clanging inside like a failing heartbeat. "You need to stop," she whispered fiercely, her eyes blazing. "We don't need your pity." "We don't need pity?" Hayes' voice was low, but it vibrated with something sharp. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Do you think this is pity, Rachel? That I see you as weak? You've done more on your own than most people could in a lifetime. You think I help because I feel sorry for you?" His eyes darkened. "I help because I can't watch you drown in the same storm that killed my mother." Rachel froze. The air seemed to vanish from her lungs. There was the crack in his armor, the first shadow of a story she hadn't heard yet. Suspense thickened between them, humming with secrets and danger. For the first time, she realized Daniel Hayes wasn't just a stranger with money. He was a man tethered to something buried deep, something that connected him to her in ways she couldn't yet grasp. And that frightened her more than poverty, more than shame, more than the fever that had nearly taken her son, because for the first time in years, Rachel felt the stirrings of hope, and hope, she knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. The winter sun was slipping low over Brooklyn, painting the streets in bruised shades of orange and gray. When Daniel Hayes stood at the edge of the East River, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, the water churned against the pylons, cold and relentless, just as it had the night his mother died. He rarely allowed himself to linger here. Memories had a way of clawing their way out of the dark, when the wind carried the same biting sting as that night. But Rachel's voice haunted him now. The fire in her eyes when she demanded to know why he kept interfering. Why he cared. She didn't know that every time he looked at her holding Noah, it was like looking backward through time. He could still see her, his own mother. Evelyn Hayes dragging him through icy streets. Her coat too thin, her hands trembling as she pressed him close. He'd been 7, racked with fever. His small lungs rattling as she carried him from clinic to clinic, begging for medicine she couldn't afford. He remembered the shame on her face when the pharmacist shook his head, the cold stare of the customers who judged them, the weight of her arms as they finally failed to hold him up. She'd found a way eventually, but it cost her everything. She never recovered, and within 2 years, he was an orphan. That memory had built him, fueled him, turned him into the man who now owned half the pharmacies in the city, who had more power and wealth than the men who once turned his mother away. But power hadn't erased the wound. It had only buried it under steel and silence until Rachel Bennett walked into his store. With eyes full of the same fear Evelyn had carried, he told himself it was empathy, a duty he owed to his mother's ghost. But the truth clawed at him. Rachel was not just a reminder. She was different. She was alive, raw, untamed by resignation. She fought even when she was breaking, and something in him, something dangerous, wanted to keep her close. Rachel, meanwhile, wrestled with her own storm. Nights were no longer her own. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Hayes' face in the pharmacy, heard the steel in his voice as he commanded the world to bend. His presence had shifted her life in subtle ways. Noah's fever was gone, thanks to the medicine. A doctor had quietly left supplies on her counter, though she never saw him arrive. At the diner, her shifts had been mysteriously rearranged to give her more time at home with her son. She suspected Hayes had a hand in it, though he never admitted anything. It was unsettling. This invisible hand pressing against her world, rearranging it in ways she hadn't asked for. She wanted to hate him for it. She wanted to shut the door and never see him again. But when she looked at Noah, curled safely against her chest, her anger softened into a dangerous kind of gratitude. One evening, Rachel returned from work to find Hayes sitting on the stoop outside her building, his breath fogging in the cold, his posture relaxed, but his eyes shadowed. She stopped short, her pulse quickening. "You can't keep showing up like this," she snapped, though her voice lacked conviction. "I know," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "Walk with me," against her better judgment. She did. They wandered down the block, past shuttered storefronts and flickering street lamps. For a while, he said nothing, and the silence stretched between them until it became unbearable. Finally, she turned to him, her voice sharp. "Why me? Why Noah? You could help anyone, but you keep hovering. What do you want from us?" Hayes stopped, his breath curling in the frosty air. He met her gaze, and for once, the impenetrable mask slipped. "I want to rewrite a story that ended too soon," he said quietly. "My mother died trying to save me. She carried me through nights like yours, begged for medicine like you did, and she was turned away, over and over, until it broke her. When I saw you in that pharmacy, Rachel, it was like she was standing there again, and I swore I wouldn't let history repeat itself." Rachel's chest constricted. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the boy he had once been, the boy burning with fever, the boy whose mother's arms had grown too heavy to hold him. For a fleeting moment, her anger faltered, replaced by something dangerously close to empathy. But empathy was a slippery slope. She turned away, blinking against the sting of tears she didn't want him to see. "That doesn't mean you can fix me, or that I want you to." A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I'm not here to fix you. You're not broken." Rachel shook her head, frustration rising again. "Then why can't you just leave us alone?" He stepped closer, his presence pulling at her like gravity. "Because I can't." His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "Because when I look at you, I don't just see her. I see you. And that terrifies me more than anything." Her breath caught. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken tension, with truths too dangerous to name. Rachel turned away before her resolve cracked completely, retreating toward her building. But as she climbed the steps, she knew something had shifted irrevocably. This wasn't just about debt or gratitude anymore. It wasn't even about Noah. A dangerous thread was binding her to Daniel Hayes, one woven of shared pain, buried longing, and a spark neither of them could smother. And deep down, Rachel feared that once it tightened, there would be no escape. The diner's bell jangled as Rachel pushed through the door. the scent of burnt coffee and frying bacon wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. She tied her apron and tried to slip unnoticed into the rhythm of the morning rush orders shouted, plates clattering, the hiss of the grill. But whispers followed her now. She could feel them ripple through the air, coiling around her spine like smoke. The waitresses at the counter leaning close, their voices low, but their eyes sharp as they followed Rachel's movements. That's her, one of them muttered, pretending to stir sugar into her coffee. The one Hayes has been coming in for. Rachel's grip tightened on the notepad in her hand. She forced a smile as she approached the booth, scribbling down an order while the customers gave her the same look. She'd seen too often in the past week, a mix of curiosity, envy, and judgment. Daniel Hayes had stopped hiding down at first. He had slipped into the diner quietly, taking a seat in the corner booth, his presence barely noticeable except to Rachel, whose pulse leapt every time he entered. But now, he came openly, in the same tailored coats and polished shoes that marked him as someone out of place. And he always asked for her section, always. She tried to keep her distance, but he had a way of disarming her defenses with a single glance, with a calm certainty in his voice when he asked, "How's Noah?" As though her son's well-being mattered more than the menu in front of him. Customers noticed, co-workers whispered, and Rachel burned under the weight of it all. That evening, she found him waiting again outside her building. She was furious this time, truly furious, storming up the stoop with her jaw clenched. "You can't keep following me," she snapped. "People are talking. They think..." She stopped herself, breathless with indignation. "They think what?" Hayes asked, his tone quiet but cutting. He stepped closer, the dim streetlight casting hard edges across his face. "That I'm interested in you? That I see more than just a waitress struggling to make ends meet? Let them think it." Rachel's heart hammered. "You don't understand. I built my life on what little dignity I have left. I can't have people looking at me like I'm someone you bought." His jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with something darker. "You think that's what this is? That I see you as something to be purchased?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath in the winter air. "Rachel, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. If this was about possession, I could buy anything I wanted. But I don't want anything. I want you." The word struck her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. For a moment, the world shrank to the space between them, to the fierce truth burning in his eyes. She turned away, her chest tight. Noah's soft cries drifting down the hall as if to anchor her back to reality. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't let myself. Not again." But Hayes wasn't the only one watching Rachel now. Across the street, a figure lingered in the shadows, the glow of a cigarette ember flashing briefly before disappearing. A man in a heavy coat leaned against the brick wall, his eyes fixed on Rachel's building. He exhaled smoke, lips curling into a smile that was anything but kind. By the end of that week, the whispers in the diner had turned to murmurs of disapproval, then outright scorn. Mothers pulled their children closer when Rachel passed. Old friends avoided her. Even the landlord, who had barely acknowledged her before, now made comments laced with mockery about new boyfriends with deep pockets. But none of it prepared her for the letter slipped under her door one night. The paper was cheap, the handwriting jagged and angry. "Stay away from Hayes. He ruins everything he touches. Don't let him ruin you." Rachel's hands trembled as she read it, her heart pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. She didn't know who had written it, one of the women from the diner, a jealous neighbor, or someone from Daniel's world, someone who knew him far better than she did. When Hayes came the next evening, she shoved the letter into his chest, her eyes blazing. "What is this? Why are people warning me about you?" His face hardened as he read it, but his voice remained calm. "It's nothing. Jealousy, fear. People don't like what they don't understand. Don't lie to me." Rachel's voice cracked under the weight of her anger and fear. "You think you can just walk into my life, into Noah's life, and not drag your shadows with you? Tell me the truth, Daniel. What are you hiding?" For the first time since she met him, he didn't answer right away. His silence was more terrifying than any rumor, more damning than any whispered warning. He looked at her then, not with pity, not with hunger, but with a heaviness that made her stomach twist. "You don't want the truth, Rachel," he said finally, his voice low and grave. "Because once you have it, you won't be able to walk away." As she realized with a jolt that she was already too far into escape, asterisk snowflakes whirled like ash over Brooklyn, coating the cracked sidewalks in a thin, brittle white. Rachel trudged home from the diner, the late shift stretching across her shoulders like a shroud. Noah slept heavy in her arms, his fever finally gone, but his tiny body still fragile, his breath soft against her chest. She should have felt relief. She should have felt safe. But that letter, the jagged handwriting, the venom in its warning burned in her mind with every step. Daniel Hayes had been absent for 3 days. For the first time since he entered her life, the space he left behind felt cavernous, too quiet, too uncertain. She told herself she was glad. She told herself she needed distance, that his presence was a storm she couldn't afford. And yet, when she reached her door and found it cracked open, a draft creeping into the hallway, her heart lurched in terror. Rachel froze. She tightened her grip on Noah, her pulse thundering in her ears. Inside, the apartment was dark, the radiator hissing faintly. The chair by the window had been moved. The letter she'd left on the counter was gone, and then she saw him. Daniel sat in the corner, his broad frame cloaked in shadow, a half-empty glass of water on the table beside him. His coat was draped over the chair. His eyes, though sharp, relentless eyes, were fixed on her, unreadable. Her throat tightened. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "I needed to make sure you were safe," he said quietly. "I couldn't stay away. Not after that letter. You broke into my home," she hissed. She shifted Noah higher against her chest, her whole body taut. "Do you realize how wrong this is? How terrifying?" His jaw clenched, but he didn't move. "You don't understand who sent it. You don't understand what you're caught in the middle of." Rachel's breath caught. "Then make me understand. Because right now, all I know is that people think you'll ruin me. And I believe that more with every minute you stand there." Astor's silence stretched like a blade between them. Finally, Daniel leaned forward, his voice low, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "You think I own pharmacies, restaurants, buildings. That's the story everyone knows. But the truth is uglier. I didn't just build an empire, I tore one down. The men who used to own this city, the ones who left children like me to die while they counted their profits. I ruined them, one by one. I bought their debts. I burned their bridges. And when they were nothing, I took what they had. My wealth, Rachel, isn't just earned, it's stolen from men who would have watched Noah choke on his fever." Without blinking, Rachel stared at him, her knees weak. His confession wasn't prideful. It was raw, unvarnished, dangerous. A story of vengeance dressed in wealth. "Why tell me this?" she whispered. "Because those men still exist, and they hate me for what I did. They'll use you to hurt me if they can." That letter was just the beginning. Rachel's chest tightened. Fear for herself mingled with fear for Noah, with a flicker of something more dangerous. The realization that this man had tethered her to a world of shadows, an enemy she didn't even know existed. "Asterisk, you should have stayed away," she said, her voice breaking. He stood then, crossing the room with a slow, deliberate step. His presence filled the small apartment, a storm pressing against the walls. "I tried. But when I saw you in that pharmacy, I saw everything I lost. Everything I swore I'd protect if I ever had the chance again. And now I can't let you go. Even if it kills me." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. Noah stirred against her, a soft whimper grounding her in reality. She wanted to scream at Daniel to leave, to take his shadows with him. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't tear herself from the gravity in his eyes. A sudden knock shattered the tension. 3 sharp raps on the door. Rachel spun, her pulse spiking, but Daniel's hand shot out, pressing gently but firmly against her arm. His expression darkened, the mask of the ruthless man slipping back into place. "Don't answer it," he whispered. His voice was steel now, all softness gone. Another knock, louder this time. Then a voice low, mocking, edged with menace. "Hayes, you think you can hide in there? We know who she is. You can't save everyone." Rachel's blood ran cold. Noah whimpered again, sensing her fear. Daniel stepped in front of her, his broad frame shielding her and her son, his eyes blazing with fury. The shadows outside pressed closer, and Rachel realized with bone-deep certainty this wasn't just her fight for survival anymore. She and Noah had stepped into Daniel Hayes' war, and the storm was only beginning. Asterisk, the pounding on the door rattled through the small apartment, each strike vibrating in Rachel's chest like the toll of a funeral bell. Noah whimpered against her shoulder, his tiny fingers clutching her blouse. She clung to him, every maternal instinct screaming to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The apartment was a box, a trap, and the storm had finally reached her doorstep. Daniel Hayes stood between her and the door, his back straight, his presence radiating command. For the first time, Rachel didn't see the polished millionaire who walked into her diner or the man with a quiet shadow. In his eyes, what stood before her now was something rawer, sharper danger honed into a weapon. The voice outside called again, dripping with menace. "Come out, Hayes, or maybe we come in. Your choice." Rachel's breath came in quick bursts. "Who are they?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel glanced back at her, his eyes dark and burning. "Men who want to remind me of debts I erased. Men who don't forget when you dismantle their empires." His lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't want you caught in this." The door shuddered under another blow. Rachel flinched, clutching Noah tighter. Then what happens now? Daniel's gaze softened briefly as it landed on her and the child in her arms. "Now, Rachel, you see the truth." Before she could respond, the door burst open with splintering, hinges groaning in defeat. 3 men stormed inside, their faces hard with fury, their eyes locking instantly on Daniel. They didn't look at Rachel or Noah not at first. To them, she was collateral, a pawn. But that fact only made her stomach twist tighter with dread. Daniel didn't move, didn't flinch. He stood in the center of the room, his coat hanging loose, his expression carved from stone. "You should have stayed buried," he said coldly. The leader of the intruders sneered. "You think you can wash your hands clean, Hayes? You think stealing from us makes you some kind of savior? You're nothing but a thief with a better suit." His gaze flicked suddenly to Rachel, to Noah, and his grin widened cruelly. "And now you got weaknesses." Rachel's blood froze. She stepped back instinctively, pressing herself against the wall, her body curled around Noah. Daniel's voice was low, lethal. "Take one more step toward them, and I promise you'll regret it." For a moment, time seemed to fracture. The men squared their shoulders, and Rachel realized with terrifying clarity that she was trapped inside a war. She couldn't begin to understand. Yet before violence could erupt, the leader laughed a sharp, mocking sound. "We'll let you stew on it, Hayes. But mark this. We'll strip away everything you think you're protecting, piece by piece, starting with her." Then, as suddenly as they came, the men retreated, their footsteps echoing down the hallway until silence reclaimed the apartment. Rachel sagged against the wall, her knees weak, her arms trembling around Noah, but Daniel didn't move. He stood frozen, his fist clenched, his jaw tight enough to crack. Finally, Rachel found her voice, though it shook with terror and anger. "Tell me everything. No more half-truths. Who are you, Daniel? What have you dragged us into?" Slowly, he turned to face her. His eyes no longer hid behind wealth or charm. They burned with scars too deep to heal. He took a long breath, each word heavy as it left his mouth. "My name is Daniel Hayes. But it wasn't always. I was born Daniel Carter, in a one-bedroom apartment not so different from this one. My mother was like you, Rachel, strong, desperate, fighting for a child everyone else thought was expendable. She carried me through fevers, through hunger, through nights colder than you can imagine. She begged for help, and the world turned its back." He swallowed hard, his voice rougher now. "When she died, I promised myself I'd never be powerless again. I took their games and turned them against them. Every man who built his fortune off the backs of women like her, I bled them dry. That's how I became Hayes. That's how I became the man you see now." Rachel's heart pounded, her throat tight. "And now they want revenge." His gaze dropped to Noah, sleeping fitfully in her arms. "They'll come for anything I love." His voice cracked on the last word, but he pressed on. "That's why I should walk away. Why I should let you go." But Rachel heard the unspoken truth trembling beneath his words. He couldn't. She shook her head, tears burning hot behind her eyes. "You should have left me alone from the start. You should have kept your war away from us." Daniel stepped closer, his voice fierce. "Ra, I couldn't. Because the moment I saw you in that pharmacy, Rachel, I saw my mother all over again, but I also saw someone different. Someone I couldn't lose." The room was heavy with silence, the kind that pressed down until breathing became painful. Rachel stared at him, her chest torn between fury, fear, and something else, something terrifyingly close to longing. For the first time in years, she felt the terrifying weight of choice pressing against her. She could push him out now, shut the door on his shadows, his war, his vow. Or she could let him and let him bind her fate and Noah's to his. In a future as dangerous as it was undeniable. Noah stirred. his small cry cutting through the silence. Rachel rocked him gently, her arms tightening around him. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "What do we do now?" Daniel's answer was steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. "Now, we fight. Together. And God help anyone who tries to take you from me." And in that moment between fear and hope, between ruin and salvation, Rachel realized her life had been rewritten forever.